Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbyville. When Texas Aggies go to war, it's a story that certainly can't be told in 30 minutes. Indeed, it would take a year's worth of Veterans of the Valley shows to tell these stories of bravery and of service. Well, last week we visited with Texas A&M Professor Emeritus Henry Dethloff. His latest book is titled Texas Aggies Go to War, the story of Texas A&M students and former students who served our country in every conflict, starting with the Spanish-American War, service that continues today in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Henry C. Dethloff rejoins us on Veterans of the Valley, and it's a pleasure to have you back. We talked a lot last week about the book, about how the book came about. We talked about Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II. Had to bring you back because there's other wars. There are other Aggies who have served. First off, by way of review, let's talk about the book, sort of how it came to be. And it's just part of one segment of a larger project that you all are talking about.
Right. I think it's sort of the pivotal part, of having been a co-author with John A. Adams of the book. But we're planning to do documentaries. We're doing a web page right now, incidentally, by which people can enroll and basically indicate their past service. And hopefully in the future we'll do a published book of those who served, listing essentially those Aggies who've been in military service.
As a matter of fact, I'd like right now at the outset, and then maybe we can later, to put a website up on the screen if we can. You talked about those who served. It's a directory and record of Texas Aggies in military service since 1898, and as you said, edited by David A. Chapman.
Right.
And that website, I believe that we can get on the screen, and there it is, right there. It's a little long, so we'll hold it up there so people can write it down, and we'll try to get it back on before the end of the show. Now continue, go ahead.
Thank you. So, and I hope people will take the opportunity to register and for themselves or friends and family who have been in service. Probably, my guesstimate is that some 50,000 Texas Aggies have been in military service since 1898, and of course it continues today, as you have mentioned. 20,000 served in World War II, 14,500 or so of those were officers, 29 generals, 7 Medal of Honor winners. The Aggie record in war is truly a remarkable and incredible record, and it is a record of service. And incidentally, I would like again to thank former President Bush for his introduction forward to the book, because that is the key motive or key to the whole book, and the idea of service. Aggies have served their country well from 1898 and are still in doing so today. The service, of course, we think of usually is with the larger wars that we see and hear about all the time. But when you really start looking at the historical record, we have been involved in great and small wars most of our existence, I suppose. And in fact, I did a brief count. There's a table in the book showing the wars, the engagements, the encounters, I guess you would say, in which the United States forces have been engaged since 1945, and there are over 45 military engagements or encounters, all of which in which Aggies have participated between 1945 and the year 2000. So the great wars we usually think of, I suppose, are well, the Spanish-American War, great certainly in its consequences, World War I and World War II, and then we think of Korea and Vietnam, but there were constant engagements and encounters that we tend to forget about, and in most of those situations, I would say in every one of those situations, Texas Aggies are participants in service of their country. I'd like to thank again the sponsors of this book, C.C. Taylor and Major General William A. Becker, Jim Nelson, and Bill Lundquist, and they inspired the writing of the book and the work that's going on here. They also have basically endowed the author and the press, I suppose, such that the royalties from the book, all royalties from this book, sale of the book, will go to a Eternal Aggies Corps of Cadet endowment fund, and they are interested, of course, in helping and supporting the Corps of Cadets because it's a magnificent record. And that fund is managed by the Texas A&M University Research Foundation. It's been a pleasure to me, I suppose. It's been a lot of work, but it's been an exciting and challenging thing to try to record the highlights, and I wish we could have done a lot more. Every individual that's mentioned in that book probably has a book into and of themselves. So there are a lot of books, hopefully, that one day will come out of all of this.
It'll spurn from this. As you were talking, we showed the jacket of the book. It's quite a handsome book. I have the honor of having one, as a matter of fact, myself here, and it's certainly going into my library. As you can tell, I've been doing a lot of studying and a lot of bookmarking here. Let's sort of pick up where we left off last week. Korea. It's called the Forgotten War, but over 2,000 Aggies fought in the Korean War. As a matter of fact, Lieutenant Bob Middleton is a guest that we've had here on Veterans of the Valley, and he's a person that you write about in the book too. Talk about Korea and the Aggies and how the two related.
Well, we forget so fast, and I'm certainly guilty of that. But remember, the Korean War began really back in 1948, in a sense. Syngman Rhee was elected president of Korea. Korea was divided between basically Russian surveillance and American surveillance after the end of World War II. And with the election of Syngman Rhee and a democratic government in the South, there was conflict developing with the rest of the world, let's say Russia and China and whomever. In any event, North Korea attacked South Korea in June 1950, and President Harry S. Truman at the time ordered American forces in to the relief of South Korea. I
want to stop you right there just a second because we're showing a picture. We referred to Bob Middleton, who you referred to in your book. This is a photograph of Bob Middleton. He is on the right. Lieutenant Ken Shockey is on the left. They are both former Texas Aggies. They met up in Korea, and it's quite a story that, as a matter of fact, he told just a couple of weeks ago right here on Veterans of the Valley. Pretty amazing story, and he lives right here in Bryan College Station.
Right,
Bob Middleton.
Yes, I've had correspondence and assistance from Bob Middleton.
Indeed, indeed. I get to see him about every week because he's a big fan of A&M basketball, and I see him at the basketball game. So he's quite active in the community. Go ahead.
Well, we had a lot of troops in Korea, and probably one of the highlights, I suppose, of the Aggie experience, one Aggie experience anyway, was at Incheon when American forces were surrounded. In the early phases of the war, after American troops arrived, we were successful in basically driving North Korean armies northward, and in fact, as far northward as the Yalu River. I have I don't know if this is appropriate to air, but I had a memo from one former Aggie who said we had driven basically the North Koreans across the Yalu River. We were, if you will, peeing in the Yalu River one moment and fleeing the next moment back to Seoul. They were invaded, they were struck suddenly by an onslaught of Chinese forces, and American allied forces reeled all the way back, of course, into the till, basically, of South Korea. And a lot of American forces got caught in the melee that followed, including at the Incheon Reservoir, Marines were caught behind the lines, and Colonel Raymond Murray, prominently, then Colonel, was one of the troop leaders who helped extricate Marines from an almost impossible situation. Murray was one of the most decorated Marines, one of the most decorated military personnel, I suppose, maybe of all time, from several wars. Right. But incidentally, Murray Murray is the personification of the character High Pockets from Leon Uris's novel on Battle Cry.
Right.
The reality, in a way, is even greater than the fictional accounts in Battle Cry. But we had an awful lot of officers and men who were in all sorts of positions in Korea, in helicopter forces, in food supply. As I mentioned before, Aggies, I think, were particularly proficient in a lot of military encounters because of their engineering expertise, because of their agricultural, their supply, their production expertise. And people, for example, like Fred Dollar, who's in food services at Texas A&M, Guy Malloy, these folks were key personnel in supplying, sustaining, and maintaining a war effort. War is a very complicated process. It takes engineers, agriculturists, scientists, and all sorts of people to really make it work. And Aggies were provided that kind of expertise to make modern war effective.
You
let's
mentioned
say.
Colonel Guy S. Malloy. He actually graduated from West Point in 1927, but he was the commandant for Texas A&M from 1946 to 1948. And he was among, reading from your book now,
Good.
among the first American combat commanders to arrive in Korea. He had a reputation as a strong disciplinarian, and while at A&M made significant adjustments to the post-World War II Corps of Cadets. So he was quite a significant part of Texas A&M, even though he wasn't quote unquote an Aggie.
You bet.
Right.
It had a tremendous impact on the development of the Corps of Cadets and of Texas A&M, and indeed of the traditions. And
there are so many stories in your book of heroes, and there's so many names. You can only really have time to really talk about a few. Major John M. Cook, class of 1939. Lieutenant Stanley Tabor, 1945 class at A&M. Members of the 19th Regiment, 24th Infantry Division. Talking about Major Cook, served in World War II as a paratrooper in the Philippine campaign, organized his men for counterattack and succeeded in knocking out several of the enemy positions with hand grenades until they were finally overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Cook, the first Texas Aggie to be killed in the Korean War, died in hand-to-hand combat July 16, 1950, having killed one attacker with his pistol and another with his bayonet. Talking about Lieutenant Tabor, July the 26th, killed in action during the final engagement while attempting to help his injured commanding general, General William F. Dean, escape capture. Lots of heroes, lots of Aggies.
lots of incredible detail, and what they did is really an amazing story. Aggies produced warriors in many ways, and it was a terrible war, and war is, I suppose, always that way. But they persevered, and they're continuing to do so today. Incidentally, I think in the class, speaking of Korea, class of 1951 contributed quite a number to the Korean War. As I recall, there were about 440 commissioned cadets in the class of 51, and roughly a little over half of those went to the Army, and incidentally the other half went to the Air Force, roughly, and some to the Navy, and all services. But one of the key individuals, both in Korea and later in Vietnam, incidentally, would have been General O.P. Wayland. And Wayland was an architect of really a modern and very important battlefield tactics, the air-land tactic, basically, by which helicopter support, gunships, and so forth work in very close collaboration with ground troops. This had never really happened before in warfare, and Wayland is really the key architect. I think General Patton, I think I mentioned last time, called him the best damn general in the Air Force.
Matter of fact, I'll follow that up with reading from your book. General Wayland, class of 23, Texas A&M. In early 1952, General O.P. Wayland became commander of the UN's air operations in Korea. An airman's airman, Wayland had earned sterling reputation as a young brigadier general in 1944 across Europe in World War II and the Normandy landing. In Korea, Wayland was the major architect, like you said, of the air war plans that really revolutionized air-to-air and air-to-ground combat.
Absolutely. So Aggies have contributed in many significant ways in combat and in every other way, supply, engineering, and I think in spirit and tradition and commitment.
We talked, we've had Lieutenant Robert Middleton, we've talked about him. He was a member of that class of 1951 that you talked about. You talk about him in the book. Of course, he was a fellow that just sort of came off the farm, and all of a sudden he found himself in charge of a platoon and at Heartbreak Ridge. And he talked about the constant combat that he was in, and told a very compelling story. As a matter of fact, you recount it here in the book. He told it here on Veterans of the Valley. Said during one of the regular night nursery patrols, one man turned up missing. 2 days later, on a ridge some 2,000 yards from their position, the men of King Company saw a body staked out high on a ridge with his helmet on a stick beside him. It was their missing man. It was the worst display of arrogance, Middleton recalled, and everyone was devastated, mad as hell, and appalled that members of the same human race as ourselves could do such a thing. Heartbreak Ridge was appropriately named, and war was indeed hell. He told that story here on Veterans of the Valley, and to read it again, it's quite compelling.
It is. It's just awesome and awful in many ways. One thing I think Americans need to keep in mind, we all need to keep in mind, is that there was really almost no end to war and confrontation and engagement from World War II to the present, and of course, as we well know now, it's going on even today. And it is very important to have trained, committed, skilled, academically and otherwise, military in service to the country, protecting our way of life and
Right.
freedom and democracies that we cherish so greatly.
There's a story that I wanted to get in. Your book is fascinating, by the way, and I want people to get it and read it. It concerns a Lieutenant James R. Holland, class of 50. Don't know if you remember writing about Lieutenant Holland or not. It says here, Lieutenant Holland died in action October the 8th, 1952. A letter from his mother to Dick Hervey of the Association of Former Students reads as follows. We received a letter from the commanding officer of the 7th Division confirming his death, but it is unbelievable. We noticed in James' returned bank checks that he had sent your Association of Former Students a gift, probably the last thing he did, as it was dated about the time of his death. This was so like him, even from the battlefront, to remember he loved his school very much.
They did. Aggies do and did, and that too is an incredible part of the Aggie story. And incidentally, most of the materials from the Former Students Association we had made available to us, and I read through original letters from personnel overseas and in the musters during and after the wars at Bougainville, for example, and everywhere, and the personality, the commitment, the Aggie spirit really comes through in that material. It's really a very moving experience. Those materials are now in the Texas A&M University archives, and are available, of course, for researchers to go and mine and find out too about your family and friends and so forth. It's an incredible collection.
Before we leave Korea and get on to Vietnam, you also have lists in your book. Your book has a lot of lists, just fascinating lists of Texas A&M soldiers in the Korean War decorated. Some 13 who received the Silver Star, some 33 who received the Bronze Star, 7 Purple Heart winners, and 10 Distinguished Flying Cross winners, all from the Korean War. And your research has come up with the name, the branch, and the class of each one of these. It's a fascinating list.
We've tried to do as much as possible. Obviously, there are going to be tremendous number of omissions, and that's the problem with anything like this. That's why we do hope people will take the opportunity to sign in, I guess, with the Aggie web page, with the directory and so forth.
Got a picture showing up on the screen. We're going to move along to Vietnam. Talk about this. This was the Wolfpack muster. I'll come up with the names here in a minute, but sort of talk about what you remember about this photograph.
Well, that was April the 21st, 1970. I hope I'm right on that date.
I'll check you out here.
But there were, this was the Wolfpack, a group of mostly Aggies in this air group who decided to celebrate Aggie Muster Day in a way that was most unusual. They decided to essentially launch an attack. And they were, of course, approved happily by their superiors to do so. While
they're up on the screen, I want to name them according to your book. I've got a picture from left to right, and I may mispronounce some of these names because some of them are kind of tough. First Lieutenant Ernie Petrash, class of 67. This is left to right. Captain Bill Klutz, class of 65. Lieutenant Colonel Bob Bell, class of 1953. That's the third one. Fourth one, First Lieutenant Lou, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Obadike, I believe it's Obadike, class of 67, and Captain Al Rutina, R-U-T-Y-N-A. I apologize to him and his family if I mispronounce that, class of 65. And here's an easy one, First Lieutenant Tom Mcknight, class of 67. And this was quite a unique muster. And you got the date right, April 21st, 1970. It was known as the Wolfpack, like you said, stationed at Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base in southeast Thailand. And this all-Aggie mission was provided with maintenance from Texas Aggies Major Jim Earl, James Albritton, class of 54, and Captain Lynn DeBias, class of 62. So this whole mission was pretty much heavy with Aggies. It talks about Mr. Pounds talked about Herbert Pounds was circling the target. Pounds marked the target bridge with a smoke rocket and radioed the Aggie attackers to hit my smoke. They eliminated the target and all returned to the U-Bahn Officers Club for a formal dinner, muster gathering, and roll call of the absent. The 3 pilots and their 3 backseaters collectively amassed 1,401 combat missions and 16 DFCs.
Right.
Pretty amazing.
It's an amazing story, and the attack was along the trail, you know, where supplies and troops were being fed in from Cambodia, and we were trying to block that access to Vietnam, and of course that was the plague in the whole war, essentially. But it was an important mission, and it was also a memorable mission, particularly coming on Muster Day in 1970.
Right, right. One Aggie that I wanted to mention, Lieutenant D.P. Pat Payne, class of '65. A book that I have read and a movie that I have seen, I think is probably one of the best books and movies about Vietnam, is the book by Colonel Harold G. Moore, We Were Soldiers Once and Young.
Yeah.
Of course, the movie We Were Soldiers, I think one of the finest that Hollywood has put out about Vietnam. People who have seen that movie, seen that intense movie of that battle, of that fight. Lieutenant Payne, class of '65, was a reconnaissance platoon leader, Delta Company, 7th Cavalry, who defended the Albany perimeter and went on to serve 2 tours of Vietnam. I wanted to mention him because people who have seen that movie know the intense fight that was in We Were Soldiers under Colonel Harold Moore, and there was an Aggie in that battle.
Right.
Yeah.
That of course is a war that most of us remember now very vividly, and I remember while I was teaching, I was in the faculty here at Texas A&M, and a neighbor of mine who also is an Aggie spent 3 different tours of duty in Vietnam within that time period. Remember, Vietnam lasted a long time, almost 10 years.
Right.
And in a way, it ain't over yet, I suppose. And that's the way it is in a lot of situations. And unfortunately, as we know. In Korea, troops were in Korea through 1974 at least. I suspect we still have a presence of some sort in South Korea.
Time is going by fast. We've only got about 4 minutes left. I wanted to
Wow.
mention from your book, Captain Robert L. Ackland, Jr., class of '63, who you say may have been the most decorated Aggie of all in Vietnam, maybe one of the most decorated Aggies of all, a helicopter pilot, infantry company commander. Listen to this, awarded more than 60 decorations, 17 for valor in combat. Perhaps the most decorated Aggie of all time. Ackland was awarded the Silver Star, 6 bronze medals, 4 for valor, 40 air medals, 4 Army Commendation medals, the Purple Heart, and 3 Vietnamese crosses for gallantry.
That's right. It's just amazing. And of course, you mentioned we're out of time, but we still have Operation Iraqi Freedom and so much still going on. Maybe
Indeed.
another day.
We have people. Matter of fact, you list in your book, and I counted around 300 that you list here in your book, of Aggies who served in Operation Desert Shield and or Operation Desert Storm. Generally in the book, you wrap it up with a chapter called A Global Commitment. That's one of the final chapters. There's a quote by former Vice President Gerald Ford, who was speaking at the A&M commencement. Also wanted to go to one of the pictures. This is from the class of 1988. This is Captain Daniel Hall. This is a photograph. He served in Iraq in the war that's going on right now in Operation Iraqi Freedom. And that's a photograph that's from your book right there, one of many Aggies who have served both in Afghanistan and in Operation Iraqi Freedom. As a matter of fact, just this past fall, Mr. Dethloff, I don't know if you were at the Iowa State football game, but there was a salute to all of the current Aggie students who served in Afghanistan or in Operation Iraqi Freedom, and that former President Bush was there and gave some medals away and saluted those people. That was quite a moving halftime ceremony.
Incidentally, the Aggie Network has access to a lot of photographs from the front in Iraq, and if people will access that, they can get a little bit of eye view of what's going on and who's there.
Right, right. You talk about civilian soldiers, chapter 19, one of the last chapter of your book, The Tradition of Service. What do you mean by civilian soldiers and how you wrap up this book?
Well, it's the citizen soldier, and that's the American military has essentially been based on the citizen army, the citizen
Right.
soldier, and a commitment of service by civilians to their country, and that's been since the American Revolution, I think, and that still holds today. We really don't have a draft. We've had a draft implemented intermittently, but in a lot of cases, I think those drafts help stir people who were going to come in anyway to active duty. But basically, our military has depended upon volunteers. The volunteer, I think, makes the best soldier, the best trained soldier, the most committed soldier, the most dedicated soldier, and I suppose I should conclude with the observation that Texas Aggies have been forefront among those volunteers for military service to their country.
Indeed, and as a matter of fact, you in the final paragraph of your book, Bill Youngkin, who has been a guest on our show, who
good.
writes a weekly article in the Eagle about World War II veterans, you quote him in the very last paragraph of your book, and I'd like to read this. Bill Youngkin, former president of the Association of Former Students, class of '91, at the dedication of the Corps Plaza Memorial, when he said, "When our country needs citizens to go forth and defend our country, our freedom, and our democratic way of life, you've always found Aggies in the forefront. We've been marching off to war, offering up our service and our lives, helping to carry our country's colors since our inception, and so it continues today." Bill Youngkin said that, and that's a good way to wrap it up.
I think so. Thank
Indeed.
you.
Thank you for the book. Appreciate it. Thank you for your work,
Well,
and thank you for the service to the men and women who have committed such a wonderful service to our country.
You bet.
Thank you. Henry Dethloff. The history of Americans at war would not be complete without a chronicle of the service of Texas Aggies. And Henry Dethloff's book, Texas Aggies Go to War, does just that. You can order your copy of Texas Aggies Go to War on the Texas A&M University Press website. That's tamu.edu/upress. Thanks to Henry Dethloff for coming back to talk more about Aggies in service. Thank you to our underwriter, First National Bank. And for more stories of the Brazos Valley veterans, check out Brazos Valley Heroes every Sunday in the Eagle. I'm Tom Turbeville. We'll see you next time on Veterans of the Valley.